Good morning, everyone. My name is Conrado Lamas. I am the Communications and Outreach Manager here at Redpoints, and I'll be presenting today's webinar. First of all, thank you all so much for being with us this morning. I hope you guys are as excited as we are today. Here at Redpoints, we think and discuss a lot about the topics around innovation. In fact, most of our clients turn to Redpoints to protect their creative products and brands. And this is the reason why we've invited today Stephen Key as our featured guest in this webinar. Stephen is an award-winning inventor and an entrepreneur. He has also written the bestseller One Simple Idea, and you have probably read one of his articles on Inc., Entrepreneur, or watched one of his many interviews to channels such as CNN and CBS. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I think we have a little problem with Stephen's microphone. Stephen, can you hear me? Well, why we check your microphone, Steve? I know we are there. We talked before. I'll finish your presentation.
No, so, thank you very much.
Now I can hear you. Not a problem. It happens in every webinar. Sometimes we have these. It's just the technological companies, but still can't get over the microphone problem.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Could you tell us really quick what your webinar will be about today?
I'm going to talk about, in fact, I'm going to give everyone 16 ways to protect your product ideas. From things that are very traditional to ways that are non-traditional. I think people will be surprised.
Yeah, I am sure. I had the opportunity of seeing many of your videos and articles, and they are all very interested. I'm really excited about it. So just to everyone in our audience, Stephen Key has licensed more than 20 products in his 35-year career and has sold many of his inventions to companies such as Walmart, 7-Eleven, and Disney. So it will be priceless to learn with Stephen what it takes to come with the best product idea and the precautions that you should follow in order to avoid that the brand abusers take advantage of your creativity, of course. After Stephen's presentation, I'll be happy to share with you what you should do in case counterfeiters and other brand abusers eventually do affect your business. Our technology here at Redpoints detects and removes more than 150,000 intellectual property infringements every month on the internet. So we have a lot to tell you about that. So great, this is it for my initial presentation. I'd like to remember everyone that we are recording this webinar today and that we'll be sharing the video with you in a couple of days. If you have any questions, please share them through our chat. I'll be answering, or will be answering them during the final 10 minutes of this webinar. So Stephen, the floor is yours. We are eager to learn from you.
All right, thank you very, very much. Why don't we go, first of all, the first slide says 16 ways to protect your product ideas. There's a lot of information here, so I'm going to go through it fairly quick, but some of it's fairly simple and some things I think you'll be surprised. So let's go to the next slide, please. First of all, I'm a patent holder. I'm a big believer in the tools that the USPTO provides all of us. I have defended my patents in federal court against a toy company, Lego, back in 2003. I have won many awards, including 2 Edison Awards back in New York. I have licensed many, many products. Also, I write books. I'm a columnist for Inc., Entrepreneur, and Course 77. Thank you, James. Next slide, please. First of all, I want to tell everybody there are no absolutes. I learned the hard way through defending my patents in federal court that I don't believe you really own anything at the end of the day. Now that's going to scare a lot of people, but I do believe there's perceived ownership, because I think anything can be argued, but it's that perceived ownership which is extremely important. I'm going to go through these 16 ways to protect your ideas. And most of these ideas can be used when you're licensing an idea, and some of these can also be used when you're venturing your product idea. Next slide, please. Yes, here's my disclaimer. I'm not a patent attorney, so I'm not giving legal advice today. Next slide, please. Yes, let's go through some of the non-traditional ways of protecting your ideas. Next slide. First of all, let's understand when you're licensing an idea to a company, that company in most situations is embracing what we call open innovation, meaning that they're looking for ideas from the outside. But you have to be careful. You have to look for red flags, because just because a company says they're open for you to submit ideas, maybe it's a company you might want to step back a little bit. So the red flags are, if they have a department that actually handles outside submissions, that's a great thing. That means they have a process in place and it should go fairly smooth. If they send you an NDA that's not well balanced, meaning it kind of leans a little bit more towards them, that's a red flag to me as well. So find those companies that do embrace you and your product ideas. Next slide, please. Yeah, avoid all companies that do not respect intellectual property. I'm not going to name some of those companies I know firsthand, but there are. Always do a background check on anybody you're working with, and it's very simple to do. You can Google the name of the company plus complaints or lawsuits, and guess what? You know, it's hard to hide today on the internet, so always do a background check. Next slide. One of the best ways to protect your product idea when you're licensing it to a company, find the market leader. That's right. If you find the market leader, they've got relationships in place, they've been working with retailers for many, many years, and it's going to prevent some of the copycats to come in that space. Next slide, please. Also, I want to mention one thing. James, let's go back to that slide. One more thing I forgot. When you go with the market leader, because of all the relationships and because they have everything in place, speed to market is going to be critical for anybody that's a product idea. And these market leaders, because they have everything in place and because they have the shelf space, they can bring your product to market very, very fast. Next slide. Now, this is very important. Now, you don't have to do it every single time, but if you do understand your manufacturing costs, very important, and you can do that by finding a contract manufacturer that's hopefully local to you, and get a quote. Make sure they sign an NDA so you can disclose some information to them. But the point is, if you know your manufacturing cost, you can make sure that it's going to hit the correct retail price point. But also, if you design it to where it's very cost effective, it's going to help you protect your idea in the marketplace because you've got the lowest cost price point of the product. Create a paper trail. I cannot tell you how important this is. Whoever you're working with, make sure you document every conversation that you have with that particular person or company, and outline what the next steps are and detail what you talked about. So that paper trail of what has happened can be extremely important. Next slide, please. Be reasonable. I cannot tell you how important this is. Companies want to work with people that have a great attitude. They want to work with people that are reasonable. You never want to give anyone a reason to work around you. I said it right there. A lot of times, if you're unreasonable and you do some things that make it very, very difficult for them to work with you, they'll find a way to work around you. So don't give them that reason. Next slide. I already mentioned this. I would always work with local manufacturers before you go overseas. Absolutely. You know the price is going to be more expensive. It's probably, you know, you can do it, and I would recommend do it, because once you go overseas, it's kind of the wild, wild west over there. Do everything local to get that price quote, to know your manufacturing costs. Start local, then maybe go overseas. Next slide. Yeah, if you truly want to win at this game, the best protection, I believe, is just having the greatest customer service on the planet. That's right. Have your customers love you. That's one of the best ways, a non-traditional way to protect your brand, protect your product, or your service. Next slide. All right, let's talk about the traditional ways of protecting your product ideas. Next slide. Okay, intellectual property tools, they're fantastic. You have to learn as much as you can about these tools, because these tools are extremely affordable. They're extremely powerful if they're used correctly. So you need to know what they are, and they're very, very different. And by building a patent portfolio or IP, intellectual property portfolio, using all these different tools, it's going to give you that perceived ownership that I think is extremely important. And please, if you're in different parts of the world, look at what your government, look at the rules and regulations of your particular area that you live in to understand how to abide by those rules. Next slide. All right, let's talk about the U.S. because that's where I'm based out of and I'm most familiar, of course. Next slide. Provisional patent applications. I absolutely love this tool. It's extremely affordable, easy to do, and you can do it yourself. But you have to remember that to have that perceived ownership, to have that true value that companies are looking for, it has to be written well. It has to be a well-written provisional patent application. Is it hard to do? Absolutely, it's not hard to do, but you're going to have to do your homework. Next slide. There's two ways to do your homework to write a well-written provisional patent application. And one of the first things to do, hey, do you have a new idea? It's really simple. You can do a Google image search and see if you find your idea. I can guarantee you'll find some similar ideas, and that's a good thing because you know there's a market for it. So don't be surprised that when you start to look on the internet that you find your idea or something similar to it, but know your point of difference. That's the point. You're going to find ideas that are similar. That's perfectly fine, but you need a point of difference. To do a little bit more searching or more homework, you want to do a prior patent searching at the USPTO. You're going to look at the history of what people have filed in terms of intellectual property before you, right? Because it's going to kind of show you the history of how your innovation or invention has evolved. Once again, don't be frightened if you find your idea, but know your point of difference. I think it's more important to study the marketplace. I do. I believe that's more important than doing a prior art searching. If you have an idea and it's not on the market yet, I'd go for it, even though you might find prior patents because something went wrong with those prior patents. But here's the catch. Know your point of difference. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think this is really important, and people, I think a lot of us don't really understand this. When we file a provisional patent application, most of the time, we're trying to protect our invention, but don't try to protect the innovation. It's a little bit broader. And by doing that, try to come up with variations. Try to steal your idea from yourself, right? What you're trying to do is come up with all the variations and include those variations in your provisional patent application. You know what you're doing? You're basically stopping someone else from working around you. And make sure you include a lot of drawings. Drawings are worth 1,000 words, so include a lot of drawings. Next slide, please. Oh, yes. That strategy of coming up with a lot of variations was very helpful when I was in court, federal court, suing Lego for patent infringement. So by all means, find those variations, find those workarounds. There he is. You guys, I don't think people steal ideas. I think they try to work around you. There you go, work around you. So stop them by coming up with a lot of variations. Next slide. A non-provisional patent application. These are for big ideas. Not all ideas require patents. A lot of ideas can be licensed with a very well-written provisional patent application. I've seen that every day almost. But if you have a big idea, you're going to need a wall of patents. And that's right. You're going to need to build this wall to give people a second thought to work around you. So realize if you have a big idea, it's going to take longer. It's going to take more time and money. Next slide. Trademarks, you guys, very traditional. Trademarks can be extremely important and they're very affordable. So if you've got a brand, you got a great name, trademark it. It's easy to do. Next slide. Copyrights, I love copyrights. Simple to do, especially if you have a lot of designs. You can copyright a kind of a portfolio for about $45 in the United States. What a powerful, inexpensive tool to have in your toolbox of IP protection. Next slide. Design patents. Design patents can be very, very powerful if you're protecting a certain look. I was able to do this with one of my products that I had a few copycats on Amazon and eBay, and because I had a design patent, I was able to go back, and once they popped up, I could go back and I could get those products that were copycatting mine off because I had a design patent. Great tool. Next slide. Trade secrets. Trade secrets have a lot of value. So there's some things you just don't want to patent, some things you don't want to discuss. And if you have trade secrets, make sure you have a very strong NDA when you do share it with someone. Next slide. Non-disclosure agreements. I could talk forever about this, but I can tell you this. NDAs, there's so many different types of NDAs. Make sure you have a patent attorney write one correctly just for you. Do not find one on the internet. And in the United States, realize that it's not federal, so each state might have different laws concerning non-disclosure agreements, that's NDAs, and make sure whoever you work with, have them sign it. If it's a vendor, contractor, employee, or even your potential licensee, right? It sets a tone of professionalism. Thank you. Next slide. Licensing agreements, you guys, this is very, very exciting stuff. I actually love it. Bad licensing agreements can be signed very quickly. Good licensing agreements take time, so you need to be patient. You need to understand appropriate royalty rates, what's a standard or appropriate minimum guarantees. You never want to top load a deal. Give a reason why people do not want to take a risk on your idea. Be extremely reasonable, but guess what? Find someone that's already has done licensing agreements before, hire a licensing attorney, but don't go down this road alone. Next slide. Sub-licensing agreements. There's a lot of companies you're going to license your idea to, your product idea to, and they're going to sub-license it to somebody else. Make sure you have approval for any company they sub-license it to. And when they do, and they start to sub-license it, get to know them personally. Because that's kind of what happened with the Lego situation. I wasn't involved in the sub-license company's business, and it came back to bite me a little bit. Okay. Working with the patent attorney, make sure you find the right patent attorney for you. Sometimes they specialize in certain fields. If you've got an app or a software application, make sure you've got you're working with a patent attorney that has experience in that area. Make sure whoever you're working with, a patent attorney has a good bedside manner when talking to patent examiners, because it's really important to find out what you need to get that patent issued, right? So, and make sure your patent attorney knows that the one big benefit of your idea, and sometimes they miss that point. Very, very important. And one other thing, if you've got a big idea, find a patent attorney with litigation experience, because they're going to use some words that are so broad it's going to protect you. Next slide. Yeah, absolutely. I said this before a little bit earlier. When you're working on a licensing attorney, licensing agreement, make sure you're working with the licensing attorney to help you. Not a patent attorney, but with the contract, it's a licensing attorney. Use someone that specializes in that particular area. It's going to be very helpful and it's going to speed the process. Next slide, please. Yeah, when you're working with a startup, you know, there's a good chance that startup is going to maybe go out of business. So make sure that in your contract or your licensing agreement that any intellectual property that that they're licensing from you, there's language in there that you can get it back in case they file bankruptcy. Next slide. Yes, never assign your patent to a company. You need to keep your own intellectual property. You're licensing it, you're renting it to a company, but never assign it to a company. If a company's going to purchase, which is extremely rare, but in some cases they do, they will want to purchase your intellectual property, but maybe they cannot pay for it all at one time. If you do have to assign it, make sure you put it in that third-party escrow account, meaning they cannot get to it until they make the final payment. That could absolutely help you if you had to go to court. Next slide. This is one of the best protections you can have. If you're going to license your product idea to a company, if you can, it's hard to do too, but if you can license it to more than one company, you've protected yourself in the marketplace a little bit. It's hard to do. Most companies do want an exclusive, so you might have to carve it out. Give one company maybe a territory distribution and give another one a different territory or different distribution, but that's a great way of protecting your product ideas. Next slide. Keep innovating. I cannot stress this enough. You're never done. Keep on innovating, keep on filing intellectual property, never stop, and always look at your competition, look ahead, and come up with ideas before they do. There you go. That's the best way of protecting your product ideas. Next slide. Yeah, all these tips I'm giving you, strategies, are basically bricks in the wall. You want to build this wall of protection, and hopefully these 16 ways have helped you. Next slide. And I think I'm done. There it is, everyone. And I think I'm on time. Conrado, are you there?
Hello, Stephen. Microphone again. Of
Yes,
course.
can
Sometimes
you
we
hear
have
me?
these problems. I can hear you. That was great. That was really good. Thank you so much. I was wondering, you talk a lot about the invention side as well, Stephen. You have so many years in the area. One question that I personally had, when you're about to create those great ideas that you had, how complicated can it be? Is it really hard to create those ideas that you will license and eventually work with, or even sell it to the market?
No, it's actually very easy. My strategy has always been to come up with simple ideas. And what I mean by simple, come up with small improvements on existing ideas. And the reason why I like that strategy, if you come up with small improvements on existing ideas, you know there's already a market for it. And with those small improvements, there's a very good chance they can be manufactured at a price point that makes sense. So you're really increasing your chances of success. And by all means, find those categories that are very, very popular and invent in those categories, and you'll have success. Never give up. Come up with a lot of ideas and submit to a lot of companies.
Yeah, that's an idea that is recurrent when we are talking with inventors at Red Points. They talk about the simplicity of ideas, for example, how important that don't try. Let's say don't try too hard. They're out there. They're for you to find, and they are somehow they are obvious. People have them in mind. That's why they become viral and trending afterwards.
Yes.
So after your presentation, Stephen, I wanted to yes.
No, I just wanted to mention, I tell everyone, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Find those simple ideas is much easier. That doesn't require education and doesn't require so much time.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Sometimes we want to complicate things. So I wanted to end the presentation today, Stephen, after your great contribution. I wanted to talk to you about the other side. It's very important that you mentioned the fact that you need to license your ideas and protect in so many ways. But of course, sometimes even after you do all that it takes, you have the problems there, especially if you're successful. Especially nowadays that we have internet, e-commerce, it's very easy to upload your ideas everywhere. That gives you more business opportunities, but then the risks rise again. So how to protect your product idea, the ones that you license, that you've built this brick, this wall that Stephen mentioned, but still people are trying to attack your ideas, right? With unique part of ideas, you have the other side of the coin that I was mentioning to you before, which is greater risks. So if you're a service, your brand is at stake. If you're a consumer goods, of course, the same thing can happen to you. People can try to attack your brand. They can try to counterfeit your products, and that can happen. That's our expertise here at Redpoints, is to protect that, especially. In order for you to understand the next steps that you have to follow once you realize that your brand is being attacked, you have to know which assets you have, and Stephen mentioned them before. So we are pretty much talking about trademarks, we are talking about your brand, we are talking about designs, of course, unique designs that make that special characteristic of your brand, and we are talking about patents that you registered. And what are the types of abuses that you can find against these kind of assets? We are talking about counterfeiting. This is very interesting because people sometimes think that counterfeiting is exclusive or is more common in weird websites that are out there. And nowadays, because of the way that the most important platforms work, it's very common to find counterfeiting on Amazon or on Alibaba, like big major platforms, because they work with third parties and they do have their policies of controlling those counterfeiters, but they're limited. They do some effort, but they cannot take care of everything. And you can go up there and try to remove there manually, but it takes time. You have to be searching and monitoring, and then you have to remove it. A manual way of doing it's possible, but it takes a lot of time and resources. Other kinds of brand abuses that we find often are fake apps, when people are trying to upload those apps that are not from your company to Google Play or to the Apple Store, or impersonations of fake profiles in social media. They're trying to look like your brand, but they're not really yours, and that's a big risk as well. Or cyber squatting, which is sometimes less obvious, but people create these web domains that are very similar to yours, and they might think they are in your website, but they are really somewhere else that we don't even know about. Now, when you know what your assets are and what the risks are, where to look for them, and that's the really difficult part nowadays. It's like I was mentioning before. Today you can sell your products everywhere, and that's great, but in terms of brand abuse, the risks are exponential as well. So you have to be monitoring. If you want to take care of your brand and products online, you have to be constantly monitoring those marketplaces that I mentioned before, apps, websites, classified ads. And like I said, if you do it manually, you're going to need a big team. You're going to need to dedicate many hours. And in the internet era, that's not the way to do it. I added this slide here to remind people that what e-commerce did with medium and small brands give a bigger business opportunity to them. So this is a problem that is not only of big brands anymore. All kinds of businesses and brands are suffering from it. So we have all to take measures. And of course, we can wait for governments and for policy to update, but we know that's going to take time. We should take the problems in our hands, and we should try with the resources that we have. If we want to take care of our brands, who is better than ourselves to take care of our brands? What kind of impacts are we talking about if you face those problems? You have the most obvious ones, which is profit loss. In the end, a counterfeiter or someone who is trying to use your brand somehow is trying to get your traffic, is trying to get the sales that you make. So you have a fall in sales directly in your business. A less obvious effect is the partnerships that you have with other brands, which is interesting because when you have a partnership with a brand, you're actually selling to your partner that exclusivity deal, that exclusive deal that we have with them. Once you have someone who is imitating your products that is very similar to yours, that exclusivity it's broken, so it doesn't work well anymore. And of course, we have more direct risks of health risks and of course, depending on the product, the low quality of illegal copies that distort the perception of your users, of your consumers, especially, for example, if you have some type of luxury brand. Here at Redpoints, we have many of them, and I can even give you a couple of examples of MVMT and David Trowbridge. They're good examples because they are kind of two types of clients, a bigger and a smaller one. So for MVMT, for example, we found over 25,000 counterfeit listings. They had a huge problem. Before hiring Redpoints, they were able manually to find around 1,000 counterfeit listings, but because our technology can scan so well the internet, we were able to do it much more effectively and efficient. And their knockoffs were being sold for $5 to $15. That's a big difference from the original ones, which are usually sold between $95 to $160. It's a little different from the case of David Trowbridge. They had less counterfeit listings, but being a smaller company, that was a big problem for them as well. And most interestingly, they were distributed in many more platforms. There were over 300 platforms infringing their intellectual property. And also, curiously enough, the knockoffs were being sold by a price that was very similar to the original one. So people were actually being fooled here. Maybe the people from MVMT, the consumers that were buying MVMT, they just found like this cheap version of the brand that they were looking for. But the case of David Trowbridge, their consumers were buying their counterfeits thinking that was the original product, and that's a ripoff. So what do you do in those cases of brand abuse? Like I mentioned to you before, you have the manual solutions. If you browse online, you're going to see many ways of doing that. For example, on Amazon and eBay, you have to fill up forms, and you have to do it many times in order to try to mitigate that problem. Of course, monitoring the web is a big work too, because you have to be constantly looking for those platforms, constantly Googling your products and your brands and your variations. Once counterfeiters realize that you're keeping an eye on them, they change strategies, so you have to do variations of your own brand. That's difficult. So here at Redpoints, we have a technology built for that, and we are able to be much more effective and much more efficient than the work that would be done online. We were founded with that preoccupation of enforcing intellectual property online. We have a number of analysts, and both in the legal area and also direct experts in brand. And we invite you to take a look at our website later and maybe ask for a demo at www.redpoints.com. Stephen, before we end our presentation today, I did wanted to ask you about the NDAs. That I thought it was interesting. You were mentioning that one of the reasons why you should use an NDA is the tone of professionality. Is that even more important than the legal side itself?
I think it is. I absolutely think it is. Because it's not federal, it's state. I don't know of anybody that's actually sued because of an NDA, a breach, but I do think it sets that tone. And one thing I do want to mention too, when we were infringed, personally, my company, on a design that we had a design patent, we had to chase it daily on eBay and Amazon, and it was a lot of work, and it did damage our brand. And it was hard to find. They kept on changing, so it was a target that was changing almost weekly on us. It was definitely a cat and mouse game, and it was very difficult to manage.
That's interesting because we were created from that experience, that frustration of finding the problem, solving the problem, but right after they would go back, and that's the real issue with counterfeit and brand abuse online in general. They find new ways of doing it. If you don't have the right technology, it's just hard. We have one question here from the chat, Stephen. The question is, my PPA is about to expire. Is fear a risk? Is feeling my own provisional? I'm sorry, I'm not able to. Oh, sorry. Is there a risk in filling my own non-provisional application?
Well, let me see if I understand. They have a provisional
Yeah.
patent application, and it's about to expire. Because with a provisional patent application, you have 1 year to kind of shop your idea around. There are certain rules and regulations that you have to be aware of. In some situations, if you make improvements, you can refile that again, and you can do it yourself, of course. That will give you another year again. If you've disclosed it publicly, you can lose those rights. And of course, you can lose rights overseas if you do not file a non-provisional patent application after that 1 year. So it's what I would always advise anybody: if you need legal advice, find a patent attorney or a patent agent that can navigate those waters for you.
Of course, if you have some legal expertise behind it,
Yeah.
it's a better option.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, I think that for the questions today, Stephen, we are done. I wanted to thank you so much for your participation today. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, we'll be sharing this presentation with everyone through a link. I will send an email in a couple of days, and we'll keep in touch, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.